take every work experience, I would say, in stride. Perhaps you're doing something that you're not necessarily like 100% happy with, but take it as experience, especially when you're starting out. Don't be so self-critical of being like, oh, this is not exactly what I want to be doing, or this is not fulfilling my creative vision. It's like you have time for that. Like what you're trying to do is build a career, and that takes time. You're not going to be like making feature documentaries right out of the gate.
Okay, what's up, y'all? Today we got Taimoor Sobhan. He's a good friend of mine in Bangkok. Amazing filmmaker, great cinematographer. Has seen his work in New York Times, Al Jazeera, MTV, and now he's working for a human rights organization called fortifyrights. So Taimoor, welcome to Beyond the News.
Nice one. Danny, always a pleasure to talk to you.
Cool, man. So give us a bit of a background of like how you got into the film world and your path into this industry.
Sure. Well, I started in documentary production very much on the path. I've always wanted to make narrative films, actually. So I was very much thinking about feature films. I used to make short films, and during that path, like I really got into the technical aspects of filmmaking. I was really enamored by old film cameras and like 16 millimeter. One of the most important parts of my training, I think, was taking a course at NYU, where we did it was a summer course, and it was called Sight and Sound. And it's basically it's sort of like you have a week to plan a short film, shoot it, and cut it. And we were shooting on 16 millimeter film, and we're editing on Steenbeck, which is like the sort of like the moviola, we call them. So we're actually
what is that for people who don't know?
We're shooting on film, and you're actually like cutting the film, splicing together shots, and then eventually you have a reel. And so it's really like editing, but like bare bones, And I thought that was a really good lesson in editing. And it really like made me interested in the creative act of, taking two shots together, putting it together, and it creates something new. The other thing about cutting with like Steenbeck is that, like a cut is a cut. Like when you have actual film reels and you're taking scissors and cutting it, you don't have the room to just sort of be like, all right, I'm going to like Control Z, I'm just going to undo that. You just have to plan it. And like, that's the kind of thing. That's why I mentioned this course, because it's really been something that I've brought into the documentary world, where it's like you have to think about what you're shooting, you have to think about how your cut is going to look, so you're not just fixing things in post or like inventing your film after shooting it. It's like think cinematically, think strategically about your work. It's that kind of stuff that I really brought from that. So after that was actually like, so I started with 16 millimeter film and Steenbeck, and then I went into digital. And then I started, like really experimenting with DV cameras. At the time, we were still in like
tape,
DVX.
baby.
Yeah, man, exactly. I still have like my, some tapes scattered around the house, and they look really like something from another dimension now. Like sort of, we used to like actually put the tapes in, have to log, all of that stuff. It's just become so much quicker nowadays. But there's something about that's like the old style of like really taking your time and logging your footage properly and stuff like that. Where that I want, I'm happy that I went through that, so that now I'm in the digital world and I feel like I'm a bit more efficient. But yeah, I mean, it was definitely after university. Worked in an equipment room for a bit at the New York Film Academy. So I kind of like was checking out equipment, checking out film cameras to students. Did that for a year and realized like I really wanted to have some like in the world experience, do my own work. That brought me to one of my first gigs in like documentary film and human rights work, actually, which was working for this human rights NGO called Peace Brigades International. So we went to Colombia. They do protective accompaniment of human rights defenders in Colombia, which means like there's people who are at risk for the work that they're doing with, like people, land rights activists, for instance. So they send somebody like a law student or somebody foreign, basically, to accompany them on their missions. And that just the act of having somebody with these human rights defenders means they're protected. So we did like a documentary about their work in Colombia. And so I spent a month shooting human rights defenders there. And I really realized that I'm really interested in the work, and also that it's needed, in the human rights movement. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't read these reports, right? And if you have some visual, something that's told with a cinematic kind of through that kind of language, more people are going to watch it, and it has a bigger impact. So doing that, then I started really launching myself into that kind of news and human rights angle with my filmmaking.
For sure. So, you talk about the human rights aspect of it. So, why don't you talk a bit about where that's led you to now and Fortify Rights, and kind of like a mix of things. There's also like even the evolution of filmmaking, how we're talking about from 60 millimeter to digital, where are we going now, and some of the projects you're working on there.
Yeah, totally, man. So first projects I shot, like this one here, which was the Colombia one, was on, it was on DV tape. I then got one of my first cameras that I still have today that has seen through like years and years of my project, is the Panasonic HVX 200, which is a workhorse at P2 camera, and I love it. I still think the images it spits out are beautiful. They are, and like it's a beautiful piece of equipment because it's all contained. This is before the the DSLR revolution. Back then it was like a photographer's camera, and then you've got like the actual film and news cameras. And I never felt the need really to go over to the SLRs because I always had these cameras. So I basically started freelancing in Bangladesh a lot. I was doing some long form documentaries. So long form meaning like 22-minute kind of pieces for TV. We did one for the BBC Bangla, which was it's called A Day in Dhaka, and we followed 4 young people and and how they deal with living in what was then the world's second most unlivable city. So right now we're talking about 2006, 2007. I did that documentary. I did another piece for a forestry NGO, and what they were doing is they were protecting the forests. And one piece of this forestry documentary was about the Rohingya refugee camps. So, and this was in 2008.
Wow.
Now, in 2008, this was the first time I went there to Cox's Bazaar. I went to Kutupalong refugee camp.
Wow.
And up until then, I didn't actually know who the Rohingya were. The only reason I was introduced to them was because I had to shoot this project. And the problem was all the forests around the refugee camps, they were rapidly degrading because, the only thing they had for their livelihood at the time was logging. So they would go into the forest and chop the trees. And, I was shocked to hear their stories in 2008. I was thinking, how is it possible nobody really knows that this is going on, that the Burmese government have for decades been denying these people their basic rights, even though they were clearly from Myanmar. There was nobody, even at the time, it was very clear that these people are Burmese and they're an ethnic group of Burma, and they have been trapped in these camps. So I've always, it really shocked me at the time. And I thought to myself, this is a story that I really would like to get deeper involvement in.
When you say that really shocked you, and what shocked you, the story or being there and seeing the camps, and what were the camps like there in 2008? And because before going there myself, I mean, it was quite shocking, like really being there and seeing these things. So
yeah,
maybe talk, yeah,
for sure. It was I was shocked at the level. In Bangladesh we have a lot of poverty, but I was very shocked at the level of poverty that I saw there. I would say that at the time, it was a lot sort of more sparse. So you didn't have the kind of cramped feeling that we have now going to see the camps after 2017, when the largest mass migration happened. Before then, in 2008, really it just felt sort of like a dusty kind of sparse area where you had huts, but you had fields in between, and it was just like tremendous poverty, and you could feel like the thing that shocked me most going back there after a 10-year. Basically, I went there in 2008, then afterwards it was 2017 when I went right after the crisis broke out, and it was just it was insane. The whole area has gone from becoming this sort of like sparse kind of shanty town to something that it feels like the refugee equivalent of like Manhattan, where you're just like everybody's crammed together, and it simply wasn't like that when I saw it in 2008. It's definitely I could not believe that it took it took 10 years, I think, for also the international community to really understand what the Burmese government has been doing, especially because like the violence that broke out was insane in 2017. But the actual policies and everything, they were in place even in 2008. They were in place even before then. This policy of excluding these people entirely from their rights to citizenship. And it's just shocking that, like how people can just know about it and yet do nothing about it, and that's what I felt in 2008 when I interviewed a guy, and he was, he was talking about how even with the Bangladeshi authorities, right, that they weren't being treated well by anybody on any side, that they felt like they were completely stranded, which they were. And the only way they could make money, really, their only livelihood was tree felling, or like just like cutting trees, and that's selling the wood for basically nothing. So you would see basically in 2008 like loads just in the morning, a huge group of people going out into the forest, and then coming back just carrying these like chunks of wood, and then they would go and they would sell it, and that's it. You just see this traffic going in and out. Now those forests obviously they don't exist anymore because they've been completely cleared to fit 1 million people. It's staggering, the size of it. I mean, when you see the drone footage, it's just
so talk about that. I mean, it's like a huge camp.
It's enormous, man. It's absolutely like a city. It's there's so many different camps as well. There's different networks of camps. There's a whole structure of how these camps are organized and managed by it's the Bangladesh Rohingya Repatriation Commission, and like the Triple RC they call it, and it's just incredible. On the one hand, I think props needs to be given for sure to the Bangladeshi government for actually welcoming and managing the situation when it was at the peak of its crisis. We were hearing reports of people, the Navy at the border when the influx was coming in, they ordered the boats to not take money from the refugees that were coming in. A lot of them were not going to take the money themselves out of their sheer humanity, but then it became an actual a government kind of mandated thing where it's like, no, we need to help these people. This is a crisis.
I didn't know that.
It's like so we got a few interviews with with boat. When I went down there, spoke to some boatmen. They were also like, and we saw the few army officials there, and I chatted briefly with them. And it's like, you know, when you're put face to face with this kind of tragedy, you know, I think like sometimes humanity shines. You know, like you see how people really do care for each other, and this is how it happens. This is there, like from both ends, from the Rohingya and the Bangladeshi, and we saw this sort of like it was like a silver lining, being like, you know, humanity will prevail. We've gone through this really devastating situation, but we have to overcome this together. And it was a very emotional moment for me to see that. So what happened was, to basically backtrack a bit, when so I was working for Fortify Rights at the time. A lot of my work at Fortify Rights is, you know, to develop their multimedia content. We do short videos, we do, you know, like character profiles, mainly for social media, and we try to show stories that perhaps might not be picked up by, you know, large networks. Sometimes we do sort of breaking news. We get a lot of leaked videos, and like citizen journalists, both in Rakhine and in the camps in Myanmar and in Bangladesh. And like we actually, one of the first videos I worked on, it was in northern Shan state, and it was we got leaked video of Myanmar army people beating ethnic civilians. And so, you know, basically what happens is I get a chunk of cell phone video from an activist sent to me in WhatsApp. Yeah. I take it, I cut it, we put some text over it, kind of following a bit like this trend, you know, that we're seeing in online news, where it's sort of like AG Plus does a lot of that work. Snappy, to the point, very short. Took that video, and it blew up. You know, it was one of our most viral videos. And so I was doing that kind of work. Especially with the Rohingya, I was getting a lot of like short WhatsApp videos. When the crisis broke, I mean, I remember the date when it basically was starting, 25th of August, 2017, and like we were getting these news updates, and I mean, right there and then already we were calling it genocide. A lot of people were calling it genocide, even before then. You know, even from like, I think it was 2012 there was an uptick in violence, and then 2016 there was another uptick in violence in Rakhine State. You know, when it hit its peak in 2017, I was just like, if this isn't genocide, if seeing 700,000 people escape their homeland, then like what is? It's absurd. So we were hearing news, we were getting reports of everybody fleeing Myanmar, and I knew that, you know, we should go there and do some original reporting. The team totally agreed. They're planning trips anyway to, you know, to get really the human rights research. So we went straight to the camps, and I was going to do an initial sort of like a shooting trip to create a short film. So we land up, by this time it was like early September, people were still trickling in. So the first day, you know, like we go down there, to get to the real, you get to Cox's Bazaar, and to get this an island called Shapuri Deep. That island, which is right on the Naf River, where most of the Rohingya were coming, you know, you have to take, I'm sure like every journalist has done it who's covered it. It's like you take the car, you drive down, then you have to get off. Like we left at 5:30 in the morning, you know, and then, you know, you have to walk for a large stretch, and then you take a boat, then you take a tuk-tuk, and then you keep going down further until you get to this point. And sure enough, we get there, and we're on a pier, and in the distance, you could see like it was just tiny. A string of people were walking by. There's about 50 or 60, and it was crazy. Like we we saw them walking over. Then by the time they got closer to the shore, we went and walked with them. And that was very emotional day of filming. Interviewed three or four of the freshly arrived refugees.
And also, like, talk a bit about this, because, you know, I mean, if you look at the images for people who are just listening and can't see, I mean, people are just carrying with all their belongings just in a one bag on their head.
Yeah, that's it.
Right.
Kids who are walking there alone. Yeah, I mean, that's it, with just nothing, with like a plastic box on their head. Some with like just, you know, basically a stick with two plastic bags. You know, the morning we walked there was a makeshift sort of like it was like a, no, I would, it was basically like a floating vessel that was used that morning. And I mean, it's just insane, because they just took some bottles, they just built it themselves. You could see it. This is tarpaulin sheet, and they floated over across the river. Like any way they could, they came over. You know, walking without food. I mean, it's absurd. So yeah, they're really like walking with nothing. They still really wanted to talk to us, which I found also really interesting. That they were like, when, you know, imagine they've survived this huge journey, and when they saw somebody with a camera, like they felt the need to explain what they were escaping. And, you know, there's a lot of people who are, you know, especially like the sort of the genocide deniers and everybody, they're saying, oh, you know, well, they've been trained to say a certain story. When you actually hear them talk after they've gone through this, there's no way you can deny that kind of, like, it's not scripted, because you feel that emotion. You sense when somebody's telling you the truth. And I think that's I think visual journalists are very well placed to do that, because we do that for a living. We talk to a lot of people. We film them. We had a sense. It's sort of like it's helped me in a lot of shoots. It's like this understanding, an emotional reality. You know, when you're prying too much, or you're asking too invasive questions, and you get a sense of how to manage an interview, or how, you know, what kind. And like, especially with them, like, I felt there was that was the need for people to document it visually, is just so they get a sense of the tone of how they were feeling when they said it, that otherwise would be missed if it was a text story or even a still photo. You know, like the still photo, it's excellent at capturing emotion too, but there's something very, you know, bare bones when you're actually hearing and seeing, and that's where the language of like motion picture, I think, is essential for human rights documentation, because like nothing compares to it, in my opinion. We were like, yeah, so we filmed there for 5 days. I was going in. After that initial trip, seeing them walk in, we kind of documented how people were adapting to life in the camps, that's what I really felt like, just how the scale of the crisis. Because, you know, having seen it empty in 2008, I'm like, this is a different thing altogether. It's changed the entire landscape. That entire region, like Ukiah district, is forever changed, because it's just, imagine, like, one of the world's largest refugee camps. So one really interesting thing also that we found during this whole process was there were Rohingya carrying cell phones throughout this trip. So there was, like, they've documented the entire exodus, and this footage is of tremendous value, like, you know, in terms of like on a legal perspective, but it's also really, really powerful for, you know, like, for viewers to see, because there's really like harrowing stuff there. So that led us to think about, you know, trying to get in touch with the people that actually film, both in both their lives in Rakhine, and the travel into Bangladesh. So after that, so we made a short film from that first trip. Then I returned like in 2018 to do this to do another film where it was basically about Rohingya cell phones. So I went in there and we got in touch with people that were documenting their lives in Rakhine State, people who had documented abuses, people who had intentionally kind of hid while Burmese authorities went and murdered people. And then I call them citizen journalists. They were just Rohingya who wanted to document what was happening to them. They went in and filmed places that like fresh blood marks, some terrifying, really difficult images, were submitted to us, like of children, dead bodies floating in the river, children lying in the ground. Some of the worst things I've ever seen in my life, right?
So yeah, how do you deal with that?
Yeah,
seeing that continuous on a daily basis.
Yeah. It's really tough, especially when you're trying to make it. When you're cutting and editing a documentary, right? And you're seeing these images over and over again, and you're trying to make something that's impactful. Yeah, I mean, I saw them hundreds of times, these images, and it's hard to deal with it. I tried to kind of take sort of like I say Zen, like you have to disassociate yourself from the image, and like you enter this kind of mental state where you're seeing, like I do this often even with my timelines, like so that you're seeing it for the first time every time. It's sort of like you do a mental wipe, so that you're trying to get into the mindset of somebody who's seeing your cut for the first time, and you have to constantly do this. So we're very good at that. I think video editors are very good at that. It's sort of like saying, okay, well, let me just try and reset my brain and like watch this fresh. It's particularly hard with the images of violence. Yeah, I mean, there's obviously like a lot of like trauma and post-traumatic stress that a lot of video journalists, like I'm sure we've both gone through that. Like it's a very serious thing, and it happens. But like the sort of having something completed that goes out and that has the impact of kind of changing people's perspective, sometimes that also keeps you driven to complete the project. We were very, with this particular film, eventually it got picked up at it was on New York Times OpDocs. We had a lot of people watch it, and some good reactions, strong reactions from people who have, public figures who have some weight in like changing how like public discourse around this. So that was good. But yeah, I mean, the process of making it was it was very harrowing. The first minute basically of that film is just images of like pretty much like the most gruesome images. And in fact, there was something from the New York Times editorial sense as well that I found interesting. Was like, that's that impact right there is sort of, that's what's going to keep people really glued, because they've never seen that level. They don't understand the Rohingya crisis. They'll remember it once they've seen that kind of image. And so we started it that way, and then we went into the characters, and eventually it was structured around one. There's a Rohingya refugee who runs a cell phone repair shop, and he's seen so much of this footage because it's all carried on his phones, and he stores some of it that he thinks is going to have like evidentiary value. So I filmed the section around him, and then
for sure.
we followed the phones and just filming the phones. So that one did well, but like, I mean, yeah, it was harrowing. It was definitely harrowing. I mean, I think you've also had that experience as well, going to the camps, of like really feeling it when you realize the impact of like the stories you're hearing and the anguish you see. It's like you have to have a sort of a type of personality to deal with that. Like you have to be a bit stoic, a bit like being able to contain yourself and then contain your emotions, and then sort of like you put them away in a corner, right? You say like, I need to do that so that I can continue my work. Otherwise, I think one of the worst things, in fact, is seeing, like I don't see aid organizations or journalists or videographers, film photographers, like we should not, be crying or be, in the field. We should not express that emotion, because in many ways it's not about us, right? And
the people are going through something.
Yeah, something
worse,
even worse,
not a magnitude worse.
Oh yeah, exactly. So it's out of respect. Yeah. We should be professional and get the job done as best as we can, and kind of not worry so much about your own emotions as a filmmaker or a photographer, because what you're doing, documenting that, that's what you're there to do. So it's tough. There was a lot. I mean, for people who might not know, like there was a lot of media coverage during the peak of the crisis. I think every news organization was there, and there was just this cycle of media coming in, and I definitely thought one problem that I think still to this day is a problem is like the issue of like re-traumatizing. Because like you've got.
What do you mean? Yeah.
It's like having the same people say the same stories about being shot at, or having seeing their parents being murdered, or the kid being killed. Yeah. And the fact is, it sounds horrible, but like sometimes these people just make good television, in the sense that if you know, oh, that there's that guy who's got this great, like, he's got a gunshot wound here, and he's got this amazing story of coming across with a gunshot wound and surviving. And obviously he wants to tell the story, but if it's like, the fourth or the fifth or the sixth TV crew going in there, I just wonder how to protect that person so that he doesn't become like this soundbite machine, and like what impact does it have on his mental health? Like and then sometimes how it is, like sometimes our industry is very cutthroat. Sometimes especially for freelancers, like you need to go there, you need to get the story, or you don't get paid. So they're out there to find that story, do it quickly, and sometimes I wish there was a slower way of working in crisis situations. Where we're not like doing the package that needs to go out tonight. Like, so I love it. I've done that kind of work for CCTV, where we're like producing packages, you shoot and then you cut. And I just feel like there's two different ways of working, especially with like documentary. And sometimes like they both have their benefits in terms of what you're trying to achieve. But I feel like perhaps a slower approach with victims of like really intense crimes. Maybe we should be taking things a bit slower and asking us like deeper questions about like why are we interviewing you?
Yeah, I mean it's important to even ask the question. The fact that you can take a second to even think and ask the question
exactly
shows that you're a person that has some emotional intelligence. To deal with, especially dealing with these people in trouble.
Totally. So another interesting one, I guess. So off the back of that really harrowing, documenting their genocide on their cell phones was the title of the OpDoc. Off the back of that, though, we launched a project that I think has a more of like a positive kind of framework. So, a lot of people that moved in the 2017 like major exodus, like I think a lot of people, they think that everybody was like really like in super dire poverty, that they're not, they're completely uneducated and stuff like that. Obviously, that does exist in Rohingya communities, and illiteracy is an issue. But a lot of them are actually quite literate, and they've gone, they're quite middle class. They used to have jobs. Some used to hold government positions. Some were studying in schools. And it was only 2012 when Rohingya were completely banned from attending universities and completely banned from, traveling to schools and stuff like that. So some young Rohingya are actually very, into social media, for instance. Like, they're absolutely glued to Facebook. They're glued to, different, like, WhatsApp and, like, chatting apps. So we launched this program in 2019, Fortify Rights and Doha Debates, where we basically gave 3 Rohingya youth cell phones and loaded it with Instagram in order for them to document life in the camps themselves. And this was really there to address this problem of representation. In the world media, all
can represent themselves.
Exactly, so that it's not a foreign journalist or photographer or filmmaker going in there and telling their story for them. It's them themselves being like, no, we know our situation better than anybody. And so what we did was, like, it was amazing. Like, we had, at the beginning, it was 15 Rohingya refugees. I did this, like, very basic training in taking photos, like best practices in taking photos with cell phones. So some, like, very kind of, like, basic, like, rule of thirds kind of stuff, like how make sure things are focused, a little bit of talking about lighting, framing issues using leading lines, that kind of thing. And they loved it. They understood it immediately. From them, we selected the 3 most promising, and they were amazing. So it's Azimul Hassan, Dilkayas, and Omal Khair. These are 3 refugees who, they've just taken this platform and they're killing it. They're killing it on Instagram. We launched from the first photos
awesome.
that they were posting. We're just floored by the creativity, the kind of, like, the drive. They're really going into places that no foreigner would be allowed. We're talking about, like, even when the camps are shut down. Like, obviously, so some people might not know, like, when like, you are only allowed to visit camps for certain hours, and then they lock it down. But they live there, so they can actually go in there and see at the evenings, or, like, when fires break out, they can go immediately. They've taken photos of that. They've gone to weddings. They've taken photos of funerals. They've taken photos of all these, like, aspects of daily life that sort of, that it humanizes them in a way that we could never do as sort of external people looking in. Yeah. And they've gotten, combined now, like, over these 3 accounts, they've got, like, over 5,000 followers right now. They've got, like, really some big time journalists follow them. New York Times photographers are following them. Sometimes they leave, like, comments. I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. And their photos are really they're really powerful. So we're trying to keep this. We've been running this now. We're in our 2nd year of the Media Fellow program, and one issue that we're running into now is in September. The Bangladesh government has made this internet shutdown in the camps. And, they're saying it's actually because they're trying to keep, like, protection from human traffickers and from drug smugglers. But the large effect, especially in this COVID era, is that, Rohingya are unable to access information that could potentially save them. This is like it's a health crisis. And right now, to cut so many people off of, like, any avenue of information is pretty harsh. It's a very harsh security measure to put. So they still manage. What they're doing is they're kind of going into certain areas of the camps where network is strong, so they have to, like, walk up a hill sometimes they tap into even like Burmese
Wow.
internet that
Wow.
sometimes leaks into the camps. Like they understand where there's certain pockets of internet. So it's very like they're showing a lot of courage in doing this as well.
For sure.
And they're continuing. They're all
that's awesome.
about it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I was just reading about that they were cutting off the 3G and 4G there, right?
yeah, yeah. So now it's apparently it's just 2G,
Crazy.
just to make phone calls. Yeah, so hopefully we're pushing for a lift on this ban, which is nuts. But yeah, so I've been speaking to them and like going on trips where I'll film with them and give little tips and tricks. But they're so into Instagram.
That's
like
awesome.
they're way better. They're way better than I am. They got way more followers than me. I'm like, oh my god, this is amazing. So that's one of the projects I'm really into at Fortify. So we're going to continue that. Yeah.
So I want to catch up on something that you said before about like the power of motion picture and the power of video.
Yeah.
So what makes to you, like what makes a good shot and what makes a good either photo or video? What makes that?
Yeah.
What makes that shot and what makes that emotion?
I think it's hard to say. Like I feel it's very personal as well in terms of like how what strikes you. But I think at the core, it has the ability to create empathy. A lot of people say like the motion picture camera was like humanity creating this like empathy machine. There's something about seeing and experiencing something like firsthand, like you do when you're watching a piece of filmed content. So I think something that what makes a good shot, like it's something that makes you truly like walk in your character's shoes or like feels that you're immersed in that situation. So I think like pieces of content that immerse me in the story, whether that's through like really good cinematography, like some things where you're using like like personal things, like even I love tracking shots and something that really like brings me into the story. I like that. Things that this could be also with good sound design. I think I love good sound design that really immediately it brings you there. Something like getting excellent room tone or like excellent audio.
For sure.
It has an immediate impact. And these things are all like exactly, like things that make you really feel that you're there. I think that's really, really important and technically harder to produce as well. So that's nice. Another thing I think is like, within the news and documentary, I feel like you need to have something that's exclusive and hasn't been seen before. Like that's really what we're going for. Like not to create rehashed images that keep stereotypes going. You know what I mean? Like things like, for instance, in a refugee situation, it would be like he's like completely without any agency and he is so depressed and sad, and like all these things that we've seen enough images of that. Like,
well, that's why I really like this Instagram project you have going on with people in the camps. You can see like daily life, and you can see a reality and a humanity.
Yeah, exactly. It's something that like you haven't seen that angle before, and
yeah, I'm gonna put a link to those Instagrams in here. I mean, that would be great. Those are super valuable for people to check out.
Yeah, that would be awesome. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, man. So what about when you were starting, or even now? Like, who were your influences, and now what are your influences for?
Yeah.
For all this.
I mean, I guess what I'm seeing now is I'm seeing a lot of like there's been a sort of rebirth of like of interest in like documentary films. Like Netflix has been really good in that sense, like with their serials, which have been great. They're very addictive and like it's exciting. It's like big time entertainment all of a sudden. I'm thinking like things like I just watched Tiger King, for instance, like things like that, or like even before that, there's like some really like higher end kind of documentaries that have been like.
How was Tiger King? I hear everyone.
Have you seen it?
No, I haven't. I saw the first episode, but I didn't continue. Maybe I need to.
It's an insane story. It's an insane story with a character that's very strong. You know, like
sure.
and they really know how to milk that. But I mean, in terms of like, I really like strong visual documentaries. Obviously, have in the past been like, oh, this is something where we could like really elevate, especially like, you know, I'm thinking like, you remember have you ever seen Koyaanisqatsi, the Koyaanisqatsi trilogy and stuff like that?
I think Baraka was like a game changer in my whole path of what I was going to do with my life, actually, when I saw that film. I was like, okay, I'm going to do that.
Yeah, remember that kind of impact of like true visual storytelling. Yeah. Love that. I'm a big Werner Herzog fan as well. Like I like that. I thought also, you know, definitely in the last few years, The Act of Killing and The Look of Silence by Oppenheimer was also very good in terms of the impact of a documentary, what it can have. Also, it was good to see that, you know, films like that, which are really intense.
Well, I can't remember that one, The Act of Killing. I think you showed it to me a little bit at your house, but I remember you were talking about it a lot, and I think we watched part of it, but I can't remember too much about it. What was that?
Yeah, it was in Indonesia, and where it was like the killing squads, you know, that they had in the 70s, and like this guy, he sort of like he was doing a documentary about the killing squads reenacting their killings. Because they were all into like Hollywood films at the time, so it was like a film about a film.
Right.
And just to see like sort of like the cathartic process of like actually reenacting the murders that you've done. And he was like, because they think they're heroes really in Indonesia. But anyway, the way it was made it's a brilliant film, very hard to watch, but it got an audience. Man, so many, like even before I remember when I was thinking about really like pursuing documentary film and seeing where it could go. Like it's like early projects. I'm thinking even like this guy Ziga Vertov, like this is the 20s. It's called The Man with a Movie Camera. It's sort of like one of those things. Like I feel like when I watch it, I'm like, wow, this is like since the birth of cinema, people have thought about like the effect it can have on societies, factual stories, seen, and like the role of the filmmaker within society, what it can have, how much power you can have with a camera, and like stuff like that. It's really been, it's been good. I love current affairs documentaries. I love more artsy documentaries. I try to watch quite a bit, but like I also try and keep sort of like watching like fiction films to relax and stuff like that, so that I can concentrate my work on like in terms of like being fresh with my own documentary. So I try to do that as well. Nice. Yeah, man. I'm sure there's so many.
You saw that they're making this new Dune film?
Yeah, dude. Yeah, I saw.
That's by the same director of The Arrival.
Oh yeah.
So that I think that's going to be pretty freaking awesome in terms of a fiction film.
Yeah, dude. That's going to be cool.
But
because David Lynch made a version, I think.
I know, but I don't know. I couldn't. I don't want to say anything too bad.
Yeah, exactly.
But I could not get into that one so much. I couldn't get into it.
Yeah.
But that's just me. Dude, when you were talking about like the role and the power of a filmmaker, I mean, I was thinking about actually now that it's almost in the 1920s it was even more expensive than it is now. Yeah. It was a very like elite level, and now that has been democratized throughout the world, pretty much. Filmmaking, anybody can make a film.
Yeah. It's incredibly exciting, and I feel like, especially seeing it go from, even at the days of mini DV and stuff like that, like it was expensive, and like people didn't have editing equipment, and we were talking like 10 years ago, and then I just saw it. There was a moment there. I think it was definitely the DSLRs when they started doing video on DSLRs, like where every photographer became a filmmaker, and like it was just sort of like it was almost assumed. Then I feel like that everybody was like expecting people to deliver both. So multimedia journalists were like, "Oh yeah, you got to do both. You got to do picture." And I still, to this day, I'm like, well, I still think that they're two different art forms and that require two different people. And when you can, just hire two people because, like, you know, like, I'm sure we've talked about this. It's like you both things suffer if you're gonna try and like you're gonna get shittier qualities of both. And like
they're both gonna be bad if you're trying to do both.
Yeah, I mean, it's like people assume, especially those who haven't, you know, really pursued one or the other, that, oh, it's the same, you know, just like, why don't you just, you know, take a snap at it? But it's like, because when you're filming, the language is different. Like every shot exists in relationship to the shot that comes before it and after it. You're filming things in sequence when you're doing like video or filmmaking. Whereas it's a completely different thing to just sort of like be shooting for that single moment, right? It's, you have to be dealing with people differently. You have to have like a different setup. You have to have a different plan, and it just doesn't work where it's like, oh, just take a snap. Like it doesn't like, I think differently. Like the way I think about images, I think, and like the way you have to think about images is different. Like but yeah. So then what basically it's democratized. Like now, honestly, like I'm seeing, like there was that famous case of I think it was called Tangerine, right? There's this film in Sundance which was shot entirely with a cell phone, with an iPhone.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
It was like, it's insane. And I think there's huge amounts of like creative possibilities there. I still think there's always going to be a role for like a professional like videographer or, you know, DP or stuff like that. But it's, in terms of the output, and like it's awesome. I'm really excited about that possibility. But getting people who have never been represented and they're making films, I think it's great.
Sure. Like coming off that and like the democratizing of filmmaking, like what are you excited for the future, and where is all of this going?
You know, I'm excited that that documentary film is finally like, it feels like it's something that's genuinely like mass entertainment with Netflix and these like online platforms. Like people are flocking to them, and they're being produced in a sort of like a larger aesthetic, and as well like and I feel like there's going to be more of that coming. I feel like underreported stories are also going to be more visible, and more people will be making them and spending money on them, hopefully. And I feel like the best thing about filmmaking, though, honestly, is like, and from a filmmaker's perspective, is really like interacting with real world stories out in the real world, you know, and going to places that otherwise people would never go to. And like experiencing that reality, I think it's one of the like the biggest joys of being a documentary filmmaker. Like going, I would have never gone to, you know, like an opium field in Myanmar otherwise, like, and then to speak to people from a very human perspective, and they're interested in you, you're interested in them, and you connect with people you would never have the opportunity to. Yeah. I think that's like the best thing about documentary filmmaking, in a way that even fiction filmmakers don't have that. Like, it's awesome to work with actors, for sure, but, you know, being able to go into like these situations is like, it's great.
So what was your, I mean, maybe you already answered it with like the opium fields, but what's your like, out of all the stories you've done, all the places you've been, what is like the one that you come to if you were to be asked, like, what's the most impressive place, or the one that's had the most lasting impression on you?
Wow, there's been so many. So some good Thailand ones are doing the shoot. Oh, I mean, like, it's kind of a rite of passage for like journalists working here. I'm sure you've done it too. The the tattoo temple, where you see thousands of people at a Buddhist at a temple, and they enter a state of trance and they become animals and they charge the front of the temple, and it's something that's just incredible to see. Like when they go into full on like crazy mode, and seeing them really get into a state of trance because of the magical power of the Sakyan tattoos that they have. It's incredible. It was one of the best days of filming there. And then also, like, I did a documentary about this prison. In the Thai prisons, there's a boxing championship between inmates, and that you can actually win your freedom. So we went into Thai.
Yeah, talk about that. What is that? Tell people who have not heard about Khlong Phrem prison what that is.
It's just incredible. It's one of the hardest prison systems in the world. There's really criminals there who are there, on death row, and like they're crammed into terrible living situations where they're just sleeping together, like 6 or 8 people in a small cell, on the floor, toilets there. It's hard. And within this network of prisons, and within Khlong Phrem as well, there's this boxing championship, inter-prison boxing championship. And some of these guys train, that's all they do. They just train incredibly hard. Some of the best Muay Thai fighters in the world have come out of this training program. And it's a rehabilitation program. I think all prisons should have this, because they're so dedicated. And there's also like a mental training and a cleansing that you need to do to reach that kind of athletic success. And so we filmed this guy, M, who was like,
But so they're training for what? What are they training for?
They're training to win a Muay Thai championship and then become the best fighter. And then once they do that, you can get a pardon if you win and you're the champion. And if you're that good, usually you get out and you go straight into becoming a professional. And so this is what this guy did that we followed. And I filmed him leaving prison. And it was like the day he's walking out a free man after like 8 years, I think it was, that he's been inside prison. And, the craziest thing was like that I feel like he was actually he was very nervous and kind of scared of the outside world. Because then like that became his home. That's where he has relationships and like in terms of like friendships, and that's where he was training. And so it was a mixture. Like I was expecting maybe foolishly I was thinking he would be happy, but he was sort of like really apprehensive. He's like, oh shit, okay, cool. It's time. We'll face the real world and walk out. But he was obviously he was also happy, and I was extremely happy for him, and it was a good day. That was a good day. But there's so many, man. I could go like.
I know. I'm telling you, I didn't realize, but this could really go on for a while, which is good. Okay, man. How about I'll leave it off with if you could give one piece of advice for somebody just starting out, and maybe it's similar to the one piece of advice you'd give yourself when you were just starting out, what would that be?
It would be, take every work experience, I would say, in stride. Perhaps you're doing something that you're not necessarily like 100% happy with, but take it as experience, especially when you're starting out. Like I feel like or at least somebody told me, it's if somebody had told me like to kind of just don't be so self-critical of being like, this is not exactly what I want to be doing, or this is not fulfilling my creative vision. It's like you have time for that. Like what you're trying to do is build a career, and that takes time. You're not going to be like making feature documentaries right out of the gate. If you are good, like more power to you. But the reality is like there is a lot of like heavy lifting in this industry, in this work, and if you're doing like, especially if you're freelancing and you're like, you're hired to be an editor on whatever, some project, or, you perhaps like doing some like shooting something or other, that don't feel like any work is beneath you. Just,
Awesome. For sure.
That's my advice for young filmmakers.
That's amazing. Cool. Awesome.
Nice one, man.
Okay, brother, this is really good.
Good.
Okay.
Okay.
Taimoor Sobhan.